Hey everyone, it's Mike from Stout Tanks and Kettles. Just jamming to a little bit of Ty Curtis here. Wish we were in Texas because he was supposed to do a great show for us at our VIP party last night. A little different this year. We are not able to see you guys in person. Really miss everybody. I don't know if everybody wants to do a shout out to say where they're at, in the country, in the world, where you're from. I'm got a beer here, so cheers, guys. Uh, it's a delicious stout, Silent Rock stout from Brewery 26, local brewery. Great job. They're doing good things. They're hustling. A little 3 barrel brewery. They are doing a lot of you guys are doing right now, doing some delivering. Uh, Personally, they dropped off this stuff at my front doorstep with a no contact. It was awesome. Like, I love that, having craft beer delivered to your home on the order. So support your local brewers as you guys all do. And we're going to go talk about a lot of questions people have when opening a brewery. There's a really so many million ways, honestly, to open your brewery, and we're going to go over a few of those that are going to be successful for you. I myself personally have been a brewer for I was a brewer for almost 16 years. I've been at Stout Tanks for 2 years now, helping brewers like yourself, get the equipment that you guys need. So let me go into this here. I'm going to take off my screen so you guys can really. You guys have a million questions. Hopefully, I have at least a million answers or more. Yeah, here's me. I was lucky enough to be a brewer for almost 16 years, mainly out of the Portland, Oregon area. But out here in the Pacific Northwest, I've been spoiled. All the brewers out here in the Northwest are pretty spoiled. We have fresh hops, small, some of the cleanest water you could ever want in the world, readily available here for us. There is a opportunity that is like no other out here. I think just a brewing community in general. I've been blessed throughout my time to really work with some pioneers and people that helped me along the way. What I'm going to do is hopefully share some of that knowledge, some of that kind of brotherhood that I just love about this industry, and the reason why I just enjoy the fact that I'm still here after 18 years. I'm the guy there with the stout hat on, and then I was at Sasquatch Brewery, Ram Bighorn Brewery in the right there, a bunch of hops. That's actually a great guy, Austin. I've known him for years. There's about 7, I think, families that are still family farms here in Oregon, and in Washington there's more. But that's the thing about this industry. I think helping other brewers is something that is so unique, as well as you guys know, is we tend to help each other out, share knowledge. And I think VBrewCon is this great, unique opportunity to do the things that we don't have, in personal right now, to share this knowledge with you. So I wouldn't be here again, I said today, if it wasn't for a lot of people who really helped pass that knowledge, to me as well. It's something that I think we're just going to keep continuing to pass that down. This opportunity gives us a lot of ability to hit people in further away regions, maybe people who weren't able to come to Texas this year financially. But now you're able to learn, get to do some studying, maybe find out if there's, things for you in the brewing community that you can really kind of have access to without spending the money to travel. So this is a really unique platform. I just want to thank everybody right now for giving me that opportunity to have that. So I've been around a little bit, started brewing in 2002 in Salem, Oregon, and then most of it was in the Northwest. I've traveled around a little bit, though, opening breweries, picking out locations with some of the owners, planning out the breweries, picking the equipment, even as much as digging the trench drains, installing the augers. That's me on the left there with, cut you with a jackhammer, cutting out concrete, which if you're, you know, doing this yourself, that tends to be what a lot of us are doing, you know, hustling, you know, working hard, making the industry kind of what it is sharing all that together. And that's what I'm here to do today. In the middle, that's me. Once you figure out you put your auger in and you had your motor spinning backwards and it shoots the auger coil out at you, and then you have to stop and redo things. Cut. I don't recommend with a grinding wheel trying to see how explosive your grain dust is, but it's a good point right there to show the fire marshal if you've ever have any issues with them trying to talk about explosion and grain dust. You can be like, what about this picture right here? But you know, again, hopefully what I'll do is be able to share some of the knowledge that I have and pass it on to you guys. You take some notes, and then any questions that you have, you throw up in the chat box. I've got a fellow brewer with me here today, Don from Stout Tanks. He's going to be hopefully maybe answering a couple quick questions. We'll look to answer the majority of the questions at the end. If there's any like side chatter or anything like that, I don't know if you guys keep that to a minimum so that it'll be able to kind of like communicate afterwards. But hopefully we'll be able to answer as many of your questions as possible here for the end of the show. All right. Man, this stout is phenomenal, by the way. Brewery 26 did a great job. Here is interesting. The format's a little bit off. This is actually Pablo from Las Armaguitas Cervecería in Cordoba, Veracruz, Mexico. Don actually helped Pablo out with his 7-barrel steam brewery. And one of the biggest questions you have to kind of really answer before you kind of really can find out some of the major questions of who's, you know, how much does it cost to open a brewery? That's usually the number one question. And you have to answer a lot of other questions before you can really get to that point of it. The first question, and really the most important question to me, is really your identity. You know, who are you? Are you going to be a small brewery, little nano brewery pub? Do you want something in that mid-range that has maybe some you know, tap room with some soft distribution? Or do you really want to be a large brewery that, you know, moves a real good volume of beer, you know, in packaging and in draft? So there's a lot of options you have. And usually the question that you really need to ask yourself is, what is your identity? Understanding who you are, really what size you want to be. Your brand. Are you going to brew everything under the sun, or are you going to really focus on a certain styles of beer? Are sour beers really what you represents who you are? Are the hoppy hazy beers really represent who you are? Or are you more of a, you know, traditional, you know, two-style brewer, and or maybe even just a traditional lager, you know, German style brewer? There's, you know, you can do everything under the sun, which gives great, I think if you have a lot of variety, that's what I see as being the future, the next 15 to 20 years, is really having fresher beer with good selections of style. But then there's still those big old, you know, breweries that really are putting out a few styles and very, very good at it. So understanding who you are, what your brand is, the image, is it your brewery atmosphere? Is it when people come to visit you that, you know, is these your brand? Is it the beers themselves? Is it the lifestyle that you're kind of trying to, you know, sell as your brand? So once you really understand those things, I believe that a lot of these other answers to your what does it take to open a brewery? How much does it cost? Those are the things that I think are going to come in so much better if you can answer these things, you know, from the start, understanding what your identity is. It's really the biggest question you need to answer, ask yourself and answer. And everybody's going to be different. So what happens, you know, a 5-barrel brewery that one person opens on one side of town, it can be very successful. And a 5-barrel brewery on the other side of town that does it, just as good of beers may not have, the same kind of pull. And there's a lot of factors that come into that. So understanding that will really help you. Once you've really understood the identity part of your question and your quest to really be a brewery owner or be a brewer, it's then really the next step is finding the right equipment. What equipment fits your needs best is really the biggest, besides what your identity is. The next step is making sure you're getting the right equipment. Your equipment should really match your goals. And your goals are something that's going to have to be tied into your identity. You're going to have to kind of understand really what you want to maybe brew on a yearly basis. If you're just starting, that may be a tough number to really know where to shoot for. Use a lot of good resources that are out there freely and availably ready for you. The Brewers Association, I recommend being a part of the Brewers Association or your local state or whatever Brewers Guild you have available for you. There's a wealth of knowledge behind there. Myself, I've been part of the guilds before, and I love it. It's a great way to get honest, direct feed information from people in the field. A lot of these people they just went through what you're about to go through, and they can really help pass some of that knowledge down to you to keep you from really getting the kind of scars on your knuckles that some of us who in the past have as scar tissue. Getting advice from somebody who has professional experience, somebody who's a trusted source in the industry is another key factor to making sure that the choices that you're making are really sound choices that you've made with some information behind that. I recommend, if you start to understand what size brewery and then you start to look for an equipment manufacturer, that you do your research on that supplier. Find out how long have they been around. Get a issue, some feedback of other brewers who have maybe used the equipment. And then, really what you need is something to, you need really like a Sherpa almost to kind of help guide you if you don't already have that on, information. If I'm going to go up a mountain, I definitely want somebody to get give me the guidance if I've not been up that mountain before. It's worth the amount of money, whether it's you're a consultant or a supplier that you just trust, or another brewer down the street, your Brewers Association, your guild. Just using those people around you will help you answer a lot of these questions, a lot of it without spending money on that. So because finding the right equipment, you can hopefully what you're doing, the one here on the right, you can see is like that's a 1-barrel system. So if that's what you're looking for, that's the kind of equipment, if that's what your goals are for your production, that's the kind of equipment you want to be looking for. You don't want to be searching for something, the 20-barrel tanks on the left there, if that's really not what's in your wheelhouse, because you can be wasting your time and getting frustrated if you're not really looking at the right equipment. So finding out what your identity is, matching your equipment goals to what your identity is going to be able to be much easier for you to really get your brewery open and be a successful brewery. And in a sense, getting the right guidance. This is a picture that I took off my phone. Luckily enough, no one was hurt. But I had taken over a brewery, and when I came in, the owner was looking for somebody to give him some guidance, a skilled brewer with experience. He had a small pub, and he was looking to kind of go to that next step of a little bit more distribution, very nano, and then go bigger from there. So I came on, and one of the first things I noticed was they had plastic kegs, and I asked him, I said, "Why do you have plastic kegs? These things are a little bit dangerous." His response were because they're cheap. And I said, okay. And then he had gotten advice from a consultant who told him that these are cheap and that they're, good. And, they even bought used ones. So I was a little concerned. We were phasing these things out, and this put a expedition on that phasing out very, very quickly. Getting the right guidance will make sure that you have the right equipment, that your people are safe, that you're able to match your goals, hit your financial goals, your production goals. This is going to keep you from the right guidance, from somebody who has experience. That Sherpa is going to help you from falling off the mountain, getting hurt, or dying on the mountain, really. Because there could be some downfalls if you do not get the right guidance. And so I don't really want to scare people too much, but honestly, if it's something that you do not have the experience in, I recommend getting some information. So there's some stories behind this. I won't really go too far, but the one thing that was interesting is there was apple juice in here because I was doing cider at the same time. We were doing beer and cider. No yeast was ever pitched on this. It sat in a keg at a cold temperature, and then we deemed it was not up to our standards to use any more juice, and so there was never any yeast added on it. We pulled it off to the side. It sat in the sun for about 2 days, and then the keg exploded. So luckily nobody was hurt, and I recommend, again, getting the right guidance and making decisions that you have to make financial decisions, but you have to make sure they're the right ones. So where you are able to save cost, you can. Other places, you have to really make sure that you're not trying to save costs in any issues that could give safety. So, custom design equipment. We have Little House Brewing there with some, I believe those are 3-barrel or 3.5-barrel Stout Tanks out of Connecticut. And there's another one of our breweries there, Sanford Brewing in Florida, in Sanford, Florida. Those guys are awesome, both of them. What they had were space concern issues. So your building is really going to help. That's really going to be the determining factor behind what size brewery. Once you get past the identity, find your location, which is really one of the biggest hurdles you're going to have to get over. That's when you can then get the right size equipment into your brewery. And I recommend, kind of don't limit yourself. If there's a location that you think would be good, but it's a little bit small. Because what you can do is talk to your manufacturer, see if they can do anything that can design equipment to fit into your building. You'd be surprised. You can search for buildings, and it may be something where you didn't think that was big enough, but then you talk to your equipment supplier, and if they're capable of making you some equipment, then you can make that location work for you. There's a kind of a rule of thumb I use of putting in breweries. I was a part of almost about, I think it was 13 breweries and cideries as a brewer that I helped open, and I'm doing quite a bit now with Stout. I typically used a 1 square foot per barrel of year produced when looking for buildings. So for instance, if you wanted to produce 700 barrels a year, you're going to be looking for a production space for your brewery of about 700 square feet to kind of, fit all the tanks and all of your, all your beer, all your dry goods, that kind of stuff in. And if you have taller ceilings, that's much better. And you can even kind of take that 1 square foot per barrel of year produced and make it even lower if you can do some customization and maybe use some taller, use the tall ceilings if you do have them in your brewery to your advantage. So the 3 kind of different sizes we're kind of looking at typically are, starting off with the small nano, pub. This is, this is own brewery out of Golden, Colorado. I believe that's Ian Burks. I think in that picture, I'm not sure if that's actually Ian or not. I helped him out with his brewery out there in Colorado. He's doing really good things. But the small brewery, they're kind of like the heart of the community. They're small. Very small breweries are able to be a little bit more nimble. You have a great idea that comes up. You can turn that ship real quick and be like, hey, I want to brew this tomorrow. Larger breweries have to do a little bit more planning and are not as able to be as adaptive sometimes because of the size of the brewery. There's about 71%. If you're brewing, about 71% of the brewers out there are brewing less than 1,000 barrels a year. We're hustling it. We're really. I see it looking at the poll that's kind of going up right now. That it looks like that's the majority of you is less than 1,000 barrels a year, and that really makes sense. We're hands on at under 1,000 barrels. We're hustling. We're wearing many boots and gloves. You have a small staff. A lot of times it's one owner, their spouse, and maybe a relative that are running the place. But these are the pioneers in the brewing industry. They typically have systems about 7 barrels or less. You're actively brewing quite often, being pioneers in industry, taking those risks, brewing those chicory beers and the coconut beers and all those unique kettle sours and things like that you can really doing. And you can really, a lot of breweries start off with this size, building their brand. Anything from 7 barrels down to a half barrel size, system can be, productive and, effective and, something that's profitable if you can keep your costs down. Your labor may be a little bit high, but if it's something where you can, really feel the heart of the community and give back, then this is something that, a lot of our brewers start off this way. The step up from the Nano brew house, and I don't know if I'm doing all right, if everybody can kind of hear me at all. If there's anything I got questions, please keep adding those in. Don will kind of chime in here and there with the chat box, and then I'll do my best at the end if I don't talk too long to answer these. And then you can follow up with Don or anybody at Stout ourselves with doing some one-on-ones. But once you get to the next step of getting into the Nano and then coming up still into that pub/warehouse with small distribution, now you're looking at a little bit of additional staff. There's going to be some challenges maybe and growth and expansion. You're going to have to think about a few things that you may not when you're on the smaller side, that you can kind of like just wing on the smaller side or shoot from the hip almost on the smaller sides. But you have to look at inventory management. These are one of the things that keep you effective, keep your cost line really good, is managing that inventory, having people that are maybe looking at that, more often. The footprint you're going to have is going to be larger. You can still kind of stick it close to that 1 square foot per barrel of year, especially once you get a little bit bigger. You can even get more use out of that space because you tend to have now bigger buildings with like some taller ceilings maybe. And you're going to need additional equipment, maybe not just a few fermenters and, a bright tank or just unit tanks. Now you're looking at maybe adding on some keg washing machine if you couldn't afford it, or that small end is you're not really fitting at your budget. A keg washing machine is maybe one of those things. Packaging, into either using a mobile canner or bottler, maybe something you start off with, which I think those are a great way to start off. I recommend getting your feet wet in the water that way. You can really kind of find a lot of things that you like or don't like about machines, and then make the choice to buy that canning or bottling machine once you've kind of seen that really used. That's a good advice, I think. And these brew systems kind of go up to about 15 barrels typically on the pub/warehouse with small distribution, maybe brewing up to about 2,000 barrels a year. Once you're over 2,000 barrels a year, if you go up to about 2,000, I think you're somewhere around 83 to 85%, if I remember right from like Brewers Association numbers a couple months ago that I saw. Once you go over that 2,000 barrels, you're kind of in the upper echelon of the top maybe 15% of brewers in the country. So those are some of the things to kind of look at. You may say, I want to brew 5,000 barrels a year. And if you've never owned a brewery, that means that you're going to start off in the top 15% of the breweries in the country. And it takes a while to get there. So have some like realistic ideas and goals that once you can kind of figure out your identity, and then you can kind of look at which one of these really fit your needs better. And this is Kings and Convicts brew house, their original brew house in Illinois. It's a stout brew house, and some of you may have heard of Kings and Convicts lately in the news. They've made some big moves, and there's a bunch of stout brewers out there that start with these 3, 5, 7, 10, 15 kind of barrel brew houses, and get bigger from there. So knowing that you can keep growing is something that you kind of want to keep in mind too. You don't just have to have one of these that you start with. To step up from that, we have Equilibrium Brewing, one of our great customers out of New York, and they're doing a collaboration with another stout brewery here, Mortalis Brewing. And that's one of the things about being this larger regional brewery that tend to fall hand in hand. You tend to have some collaborations that tend to be really fun, but there also ends up being a little more competition in that bigger bracket going up there. There's some things that you kind of need to think about, because you're going to have a larger staff. You may have now sales people on your team, distribution relationships that you have to figure out. Part of your staff may be salespeople, cellarmen only, or seller people, only. You're having people who are only on the brew deck. Some people are only on packaging. So you're starting to get in some more specifics when you get into these larger breweries. And you may have like some assistant bar managers, servers, sales. There's a little bit more planning involved. You have to, there's less winging it when you're at this size. There's a lot of, we've got our next 3 to 5 months of production on the calendar kind of a thing. And then, you've probably added a lot of food maybe at this point, which is a whole nother business, something to really think about. These, breweries on the middle kind of more, I'm kind of sorry, I missed that on more the middle side. The larger regional breweries may or may not have those tasting rooms kind of built into the actual distribution warehouse. They may have 2 locations, which is also something to think about. Having the ability to start small and maybe grow big, or big. And then a lot of big breweries are adding these tap rooms, going back to the old school, because they know that that's really something. When you're not in a COVID situation like we are now, which we're going to get past this, guys, I know it's going to happen. Then, you tend to see more of that margin coming by the pint. You're going to have more equipment. Forklifts are definitely going to be something that you're going to probably think about. Palletizers. You're probably owning your own packaging equipment at this point. The mobile ones are great. Once you're doing lots and lots of packaging, it tends to makes more sense to get the equipment. But then again, you have to think about it. Somebody has to know how to manage that equipment, run it, keep it operable there. So equipment is really honestly only one of the pieces of opening a brewery. One of the biggest pieces is human resources. Is really, the people that make up your business is really who you are. That's your brand. That's really what your is your image is, are the people behind it. What is your staffing plan? You're going to have skilled labor involved the bigger you get. If it's not yourself, not just a brewer. And, you need to really honestly be realistic about some of these things, because there's, some people say, hey, it's just going to be me and my wife or my husband or, my son, and we're going to do this. And, you have to, in a sense, think about your time. You can't just work 80 hours a week. I mean, there's a limit to really what you can do physically. I think paying people an honest wage is going to help keep them motivated to be behind you. So a lot of people focus so much on the equipment when I first talk to them about, what does it take to open a brewery? And it's typically one of the smaller aspects of really opening a brewery is the equipment. Your building, and, that tends to be a big portion of it. And then the labor that's behind that to, actually produce the actual beer. So I think paying people to a decent wage to keep them with you, because retraining is a very expensive part of that. It's something to think of, and getting somebody like to give you the right guidance to get the brewery. It's the same idea as getting the right people to actually execute this for you now if it's not yourself. Know your limitations too. If you're not good at inventory, get somebody who can take that care of that for you. If you're not good at social media or marketing, which is a big part of this. I know some people are great at brewing, but then the social media or the marketing part becomes a challenge. There's lots of, temporary fixes to get those things taken care of for you, but then making sure as you get bigger is really putting people in those places to have you be successful. So we get kind of back to that, one of the most common questions I get is really, what does it cost to open a brewery? And this is Mike and Jacob Serino. We would be probably nursing a hangover after coming back from the big VIP party from what was scheduled for last night at their brewery, and it would have been a blast, I'm sure, with Ty Curtis and seeing all your brewers. I'm kind of bummed we get to do that, but we'll do something here in the future and get together, guys. But Mike and his son there, Jacob, they are able to really answer this question because they know their identity. They figured out their identity from the get-go. They wanted to be a family pub that is a 5-barrel electric brewery in San Antonio. And so this is, they knew what they were going to do. They wanted to have a place where people could gather, get beer, get, some good food, mingle, talk, get to really kind of see friends in the community, and that really giving back to the community. So there's so much of this that has to really be the questions that, the answers to so many of these questions are really, a lot of it is asking the identity question to yourself. Who are you and what is your brand? Once you figure out who are you, what is your brand, now what size is going to be the appropriate equipment? Getting that right guidance to get that, is going to be a really good key factor, because so you really want that Sherpa to kind of guide you up the mountain, guide you down the path, down the river, that river guide, somebody that's really going to help you out. Once you've kind of figured out what your identity is, what your goals are, then you can really kind of understand what is it going to cost to get you there. The building will then start to make sense, because there is no, hey, it cost $100,000, it cost $5 million to really answer that question, because every brewery is as unique as the craft beer that you've probably, your most recent craft beer. And that's really kind of one of the things to keep in mind, is the craft beer drinker really wants to have selection. So in your brand, in your identity, sticking to really who you are, what are your core values, what is it about you that makes you unique? Those are the things you stick to. But like anything else, is being adaptive, being innovative, being creative. Those are the things that keep people excited about craft beer. That's what really just drives me to kind of look for that next new flavor or that next new brewery that's popping. Craft beer drinkers have this insatiable appetite that is so hard to really, fulfill, because you're only as good as the last beer you made, right? Or the beer that's not even in my hand yet. I want the beer that you haven't even brewed. Sometimes is sometimes the attitude. So it's something that is wonderful. I've loved to be a part of this community for as long as it has. I know there's so much of this is really working together, getting to know other brewers. I recommend going and getting with your brewers guilds, collaborating with other breweries, understanding and knowing your community. Listen to your staff as much as your customers. Honestly, that I've seen so many good ideas coming out of the employees that have worked in the front of the house, the back of the house. They've come to me like, hey, I drank this beer. Have you ever been to this brewery? Those things are really going to help you, because they really will have the finger on the pulse and allow you to really have your identity be part of the people, will have more buy-in, with the brand that you're making. So this is Christopher from Indigo Reef Brewing on his 7-barrel electric brewery that I helped him out there in South Carolina. I hope he's doing well. And these, this point of, where we're at, I mean, I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for the people that have really helped pass the knowledge and shared their knowledge with me. That brotherhood, that karma that I really want to keep going throughout the community. I hope brewers that are out here listening, if there's anybody I know, you're still doing those things, giving back, mentoring the people. Once you've got this knowledge, please pass it on without really getting, anything more than just joy out of it. And that's what really keeps me thriving and, and going and moving, is the beer community is something that is just so wonderful. If you're not, an official, brewer, owner, part of it, and get it there, it's so wonderful. It's worth the hard battle to get in here. And I just want to say cheers, guys. I really want to say thanks a lot. It's something different. We're not in San Antonio able to really, do it the way we wanted to, but, being innovative, being adaptive, using this BrewCon atmosphere is awesome. I hope you guys are enjoying this. I hope you've got some good feedback that you can give to us. Something that we love at, Stout is talking to fellow brewers. And we're really kind of bummed and missing it right now, but we know we're going to get over this. I actually brewed, I went through the Great Recession, or, whatever you want to call it. And it's interesting because in the harder times of economics, we tended to have higher beer sales and more profitability. It was something where people chose to, instead of buying a steak and two burgers, or a steak and two beers, they're buying a burger and four beers. And so our profit margins actually went higher. And there's some really good success stories that I hear out there. There's some breweries that are just like amazed. They say we can't keep up with production. We're trying to package. We can't get enough crowlers. So there's some really bright things out there right now in the community. You just don't hear about those as much on the news. Those of us who are, kind of talking with brewers are operating right now, we're hearing a lot of really good things. So keep your heads up. We'll make this happen once this is all over. I can't wait to share these beers with you folks. And I appreciate the time that you've given me. If you want to schedule any one-on-ones, you can, hit some one-on-one contact time with me and put it on my calendar, or any of the guys. If you're working with somebody at Stout already, if you're working with Scott or Don, we can kind of get you in contact with Scott or Don. But I think that's kind of about it for me here. Let me put my video on here. Cool. All right. Well, thanks everyone again. Hopefully I got some good information out there. Didn't bore you all, but appreciate it. And is there any questions? I'm going to go look in here, back into this question. Let's see. What's the first one we have here? Is it easy? Is it easy as making?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. No Thanks, Don. Yeah, there's a million ways, honestly. If there is, something where somebody's trying to tell you that you have there's a certain amount of brewery, some of my most profitable breweries that I have were actually like 3-barrel and 5-barrel breweries. So I really, anyone who's going to tell you that if you think it's like 15 barrels and you have to make, to be positive, is like, no, you can, it's same idea as you can sell popsicle sticks and make profit off it. You just have to have your cost, not be more than what you're bringing in. And so one of my bigger questions is to go small and be more experimental, but working harder or more or bigger and less brew time. Yeah, great question, Nat. There's something that you can really do, and I think sometimes the one size fits all, or this is a lot of people want to open almost with a 10-year plan. So if you're able to look at, doing something like starting small, building your brand, building your identity with like a, 3-barrel brew pub, that may be all as big as you get, and you may find out that, like, even as successful as that is, maybe it's good to just open another one across town. or whatnot, because starting off with maybe a 15, 20, 30 barrel brew house, that's a lot of beer. You really got to figure out what you're doing with all that beer, because it's one thing to brew it, it's another thing to sell it. So having those stepping stones or building your brands with those smaller things is awesome. I think that's really what the heart of the community is doing. The selection, the small fresh batches, is really, I think, great. How much do you reckon it would cost to start up a nano brewery? Equipment cost, materials, rent, like how much would you have needed to save up or loan? And that's coming from Anders. Great question, Anders. That's a lot of pieces that are in there. I think once you answer that question of your identity, and if you say, hey, I want to be a, let's say, just for instance, you say a 3 barrel brewery, it's a very common thing. You can probably get the equipment that you need to be able to brew around 300-ish barrels a year. On the brew side of things, depending on how much automation you wanted, if you were looking for, either like electric or direct fire in that size, because steam is just a little too expensive. To me, I don't really talk too much steam unless somebody's at least 10 or 15 barrels. But sevens are good depending on your output. But I would say, equipment wise, you can go anywhere from, it's a big range, maybe 30 to 80,000, for the equipment. The size of the building, depending on your atmosphere, if you think you're going to have some seats in there, it's a different atmosphere. Or if you're just going to have, walk away, no sit down kind of atmosphere. But, looking at your brewery, realistically, I say you're probably spending 40 to 60-ish grand. Maybe that's a tighter range, to be in that range. You could do less, but the automation is going to be a bigger factor. Do you want like a lot of advanced automation, or do you want very simple, basic? Your leases for something on that are going to be all over the place depending on where you're at. But there's the 3 barrel brew house. You could probably have a really, 750 to 1,000 square feet, little tiny tap room, making 300 barrels a year, if that kind of helps you out. So all utilities being available and relatively the same cost, would you recommend electric or direct fire for 7 barrel brew house? From Dave. Dave, that's a great question. I would think that the building is really going to determine what the best heating source for you is. I did a panel earlier with about heating source between electric, steam, and direct or indirect fire. There's actually, in a sense, if you say direct fire, I really kind of go, hey, you have an option of direct or indirect, and we can get into that a little bit if you want to talk more about that. The indirect a little more efficient, but has a little higher cost to it. So it really comes down to the building and really what your rates will be. With electric, you typically only have to think about steam as the only thing in your concern. There's no combustion gases or anything like that, which you have to deal with direct fire or indirect fire. So with electric, you can either vent the steam out, very simple, or you can condense it back into water, the vapor, and then from the vapor into water, and then have it drain if you have an issue there. They're great for buildings like historical buildings that maybe you can't, you don't want any penetrations on the roof or any of those things. Direct fire or indirect fire, the gas option is another great option. If you're, in a remote area that doesn't have, or a building that doesn't have the power for electric, gas is a great option. It can give you, in farmhouse situations or very remote, that's usually one of your only options. And it's either like direct fire is going to be natural gas or propane. These are great, historically, that's what we've brewed with as brewers is fire. Over time, electric and steam became options. So it's kind of really determined on you, and the building will really be the biggest kind of determining factor on that. So let's see. This is Joe, a question says, if you have a solid growth plan, can you stop at a certain mid-size so as to stay in the lifestyle and not become corporate? Very, very good question, Joe. I think that is the preferred zone to be in right now, honestly, is in that mid zone or small zone because there's a lot of creativity. You're usually a little bit more connected to your community. At the large size, there's more people who tend to be, in front of people are the actual brewers, the owners. They're right in front of all the people drinking. They're at the bar, maybe pouring a beer for them that night, the assistant brewer or something like that. So you really do get your finger on the pulse, and you don't. You can stay away from that drifting, was maybe what you're kind of talking there, into that like larger corporate. I think what the corporate is not necessarily evil. What corporate, to me is really a lot of it is somebody, who's maybe even started small and they got bigger. So some of those are just good success stories. So the feel of what I think you're talking about there, and that is that you're still small, you're still connected to your community, and I think maybe having multiple locations with those nano or small or mid-size, to me, is something where you can regionally pick up better fingers on the pulse rather than one central location that's trying to brew and have the finger or the pulse of everybody in like maybe an entire, state or an entire part of the country or whatnot. So um, great question. Thanks, guys. Let's see. Nat says here, or Jen, let me go with Jen here. The first one, is it important to also invest in a canning system when opening your brewery? Well, that is a great another question right there. I think, being diverse and having the ability to do multiple things is good. Canning equipment can be a little pricey depending on the kind you get. It could also be something that maintenance wise, you have to make sure you understand how to use that equipment. So you're gonna have to have some skilled people that really know how to operate it. So if you think you're just gonna buy a canning machine and then learn how to can, you might have a learning curve that goes behind that. So, and that's where I kind of recommend checking out mobile canners if you can, or asking other brewers, about machinery. If you are really that interested in buying that canning machine, is getting to know how to operate it, because it's one thing to have the equipment. Another part of it is maybe like knowing how to use that, knowing how to keep it maintained. If you have canning packaging equipment, you tend to want to be using that thing quite often. 2 to 3 times a week, it would be probably my recommendation. If you're not really using that canning machine 2 to 3 times a week, then you should probably use a mobile canner or a mobile bottler or a crowler machine. Everybody's scrambling right now to try to package things differently than what it was, 2 months ago. People who would never even consider packaging are packaging. But I think being diverse is a great part of your portfolio that you can have to keep you relevant. Let's see. What is the best way or best methods of making the jump from home brewer to professional brewer? Craig, great question. I would say go visit your local brewery. I had guys coming into my brewery all the time. They just pick their head around the back door, or the bartender would, page me and say, "Hey, somebody out here, do you have a second to come talk to somebody at the bar?" Say, "Hey, yeah, it's my assistant. Hey, can you keep the mash going or whatever?" And then, pop out and talk to somebody. It's a good excuse to have a beer, which I got to wet my whistle here for a second, guys. Give me a second. Boy, I don't know if you guys can get a hold of this. We're at Silent Rock Brewery 26 here in Portland, Oregon. If you can get a hold of that, it's a phenomenal beer. Making that jump, go stop by your local brewery. Ask them. Most of them are pretty decent people. They'll kind of give you as much information as they possibly can to help point you in the right direction. I recommend getting, some research behind that. The same thing as if you were going to do anything else, like any other industry. Do your research, find out if it's something that you'd be interested in. Most people are interested in the glory of brewing. It is a wonderful job. I love it, meeting people all the time, creating recipes, having people give me the thumbs up when they're drinking that beer is just basically the highlight of, your day as a brewer. But it's not, it's not all rainbows and unicorns. You know, it's a fun job, but it's a, you know, like anything, if you're going to be a business owner, you need to be focused, you need to be driven. To be a professional brewer, there's a lot of things you can do, but I say get in touch with your local Brewers Guild. Check with the Brewers Association about any literature that you can kind of read up on. A lot of it is really readily available out there for you, free of charge. You know, going in, talking to a brewery and asking if they have any apprenticeships that they have there, telling them you're interested. You know, I hired people quite often that honestly did not have that much professional brewing experience to be like a cellarman or keg washer or even like assistant brewer, and they blossomed into these amazing brewers and became these, you know, head brewers that I, you know, was so proud to give them these breweries and let them take over and see them really their success grow. So you have the right attitude, you can be trained on how to brew. You know, brewing something is a skill you can learn. So that's something that's, you know, for any of you guys out there that have the passion, you can learn the skill. If you have the drive, you can learn the skill of brewing and the art of brewing. So those are the things that I would recommend: is checking with your local brewers, your, you know, brew association, guilds, getting up as much as you can. Um, uh, let's see, what's another one here? Dean asks, if planning to grow into a 7-barrel brewery, can it be used to half batch while ramping up that volume? Great question, Dean. Yes, you can. I mean, I think at least on ours, you can. I'm not sure about competitors. I want to talk about theirs. Possibly can. Because there would be, oh, sorry. I would suggest doing 65% batch if you can, because that would give you the better utilization, better target. You think you're going to hit your targets better at about that, just as a out of my own experience, you know, when you cut that mash bed in half, like 50%, the, you know, the targets you're shooting for tend to be tougher to get to. The efficiency is really hard to judge once you cut that mash bed in half. So I got a lot better when I did more like 65%. Like, you know, for instance, if I was brewing a 15, you know, barrel batch, a lot of times I do something around like, I don't know, 10 barrels, you know, so 8 barrels instead of like a, you know, 7 barrels, instead of, you know, really cutting that all the way down to 7.5 barrel, because the efficiency was tough sometimes when you got that low. So, let's see. Is there any concerns with opening a brewery in the next year with this virus and interruption in commerce? You know, I think like anything, there's definitely concerns when you're opening a brewery, you know, or any business for that matter. But you know, from proven, you know, facts, I know my beer sales that I usually managed usually anywhere between 6 to 9 breweries at a time during my brewing career when I was a regional brewer. I had my main brewery that I was brewing on most of the time as a 15-barrel brew house, but I brewed on everything, you know. So, you know, those were times where our beer sales actually skyrocketed, you know, went high. And there's stories you can hear right now. There's breweries that are having a hard time keeping up. They have, you know, they're trying to keep up with the beer, because right now, if you look, I mean, if I look at my recycling, I could probably build an Aluminacraft boat out of my recycling right now. So, but or a glass recycling plant. I don't know, one or the other. So, this is going to end, and even when it ends, it's just there. It'll just be more personal for you. You're going to just have more of a personal one-on-one, back to the one-on-one, back to really seeing people, shaking their hands again, you know, when it's safe, and really kind of that community is going to be even stronger. I mean, we've been, you know, the Alone Together, any of these hashtags, I love it because they're really, it's amazing. The community, people are reaching out. Like I said, brewers I'm talking to are really, they're doing more than they ever have in sales. So, Oh, good. I think I'll get kind of maybe one more here and then give you guys a minute or two to get to maybe your next one. Don's going to be doing one here later today. I'm going to help me out. What is the best way to predict barrel per year production? This is from Bradley. That's a great question, Bradley. It's a tough one to really kind of think about. But if you go to the Brewers Association, you can see a lot of numbers that are going to be provided for you there. There's going to be some stuff where I kind of typically, think that, you can almost sell roughly about 4 barrels per seat per year, kind of if you have like a tap room, if you want to kind of base something on that more nano size of things that I think the majority of you in. They said 71% of the brewers in the United States are under 1,000 barrels. I think the majority of guys are going to fit into that category, or maybe the next step, you could maybe 85 go 2,000 barrels and below. So if you want to take something like maybe 1,000 barrels a year, divide that by, your 52 weeks, or if you're going to be open for 50 weeks or whatever you are, and then you can kind of go from there. I think for most people, if you look at some of the numbers, the majority of people probably fall between 300 and 800 barrels a year to be, so if that's a wide range, 300 to 800 barrels a year. But hopefully that gives you an idea of where you want to fit in. If you're going to probably fit into the majority of the brewers, then looking for a system that is probably in a 3 to 7 barrel system is probably going to be something if you're a first starter. And then if it's really successful, either opening another location that you can either feed to. If you still don't have full capacity, you can just feed to a tap room, or going into another larger facility down the road and not doing your 10-year plan right out of the gates, but stepping into that larger brewery, I think is a big success. So, I see there's a few more questions. I don't know if I'm going to have as much time to get them all. I love these guys. Feel free to keep contacting us one-on-one. Uh, let's see. True. If you have three-phase ability on a fully electric system, the cost is not going to be different between three-phase or single-phase, as far as I know. I think what you're you just use less amps out of your box, out of the three-phase. So if you have only 400 amps, if you're using single-phase, you just have to use more amps to that system. Where if you use three-phase, you can use less amps to that system and take amps in that building and put them into other pieces of equipment in the brewery. So electric systems tend, on the smaller range, 10 barrels and below at least, tend to be the more efficient and less costly choice. But if you're in the country, then gas is going to be your option at that point. Because the building really does determine. So I just kind of want to wrap up with, again, like really thanking you guys honestly for this. I miss so many of my brewer friends. There's so many I was looking forward to seeing out there, meeting people I hadn't met yet, seeing people I know. I appreciate everybody for really taking the time to be here. This is the industry, I said, that I just love. I've been blessed to be in this industry for 18 years now. The white hairs and the beard are probably showing it. But appreciate everybody here. Cheers. Cheers. We're going to get through this, guys. It's something that none of us have really faced, but I know craft beer will survive. So, cheers.